And welcome into another episode of the Sick Podcast with Draft Vogel. I'm John Vogel, your host, and today we got some nerdy topics to kind of get into. We're going to talk about PFF, grades, what they mean going into the NFL draft process, and then also about the actual process itself with some of the rankings and philosophies. Jarvis has some really good stuff to get into. But first, big guns in the studio today. Sammy, AC, let's get this thing rolling.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to The Sick Podcast. With Draft Vogel.
With the first pick in the 2021 NFL Draft. The first pick in the 2022 NFL Draft. With the first pick in the 2023 NFL Draft.
The sickest NFL Draft Show. It's gonna be sick.
And of course, as always, the Sick Podcast is brought to you by DraftKings. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app and use the DraftKings code SICKSPORTS to get $200 in bonus bets instantly when you bet just $5 on any NFL bet. So that's $200 that you get instantly because the crown, it's yours. Guys, we got Gam in here today. We got Jarvis with us today. Full crew in for this episode, and we get to talk about some stuff that Jarvis has been, he's been going on about in our group chat for a long time about talking about. So I'm sure he's very excited. Gam, you doing all right, man?
I'm awake. Yeah.
That's good. That's a start.
Yeah.
And Jarvis?
Doing good. I'm excited.
See, I called it. I'm good at this. No, I'm just kidding. So starting out here with our little bit of a conversation, because one of the things that we get a lot of questions about, I think, in, media side, and people want to know more about the actual draft process and how it works, is PFF grades and what do they mean? Coming into this process, there's a lot of PFF truthers out there, people that they think that PFF is this huge, machine that's amazing. NFL teams use them and colleges use them and blah, blah, blah. But then recently we had J.J. Watt on the Pat McAfee show kind of trashed them publicly in a long exchange that 2-minute rant is really what he went on. So, Jarvis, this was your idea, so we might as well let you get the first words on it. What did you want to specifically expand on PFF?
Gotcha. No, I just wanted to talk about the aspect of it's such a divisive thing. You'll go on there on Twitter and you'll see people saying some players are like, it's the most useless, meaningless thing. They don't know what they're doing. And you'll see people that use PFF. They're like, oh, it's so great. It's fantastic. I use it for everything. It's such a great indicator of the ability of players. And first off, I want to know, how do you guys feel about it? And then from there, we could kind of go into discussing the topic a little bit further.
Freaking Jarvis.
Go ahead, Gam.
I don't. Okay. Well, okay. Here's my issue with PFF is we don't know who's grading, right? We don't know the people grading. We don't know what they actually know about football. We don't. I also had to take issue with it's like halftime of a college football game, and they're coming out with their grades for the players. There's no all 22 out. What are you using? What are you doing? And if you don't have that, then how can I really put any stock into that grade? It just feels like a lot of it is for clicks, and just because no one else is like them, they kind of get away with saying like, who's gonna prove us wrong, who's gonna do better. And it also, I don't mind PFF and their grading, but I do know overall it's a matter of if I do 3 easy things perfectly, easiest assignments in the world as a football player perfectly, great, I get 100 grade. If Myles Garrett and Trent Williams are battling each other all game and they're winning reps, losing reps, fighting each other, their grades are going to be lower than mine. So now the media or fans will say, oh, Justen Gamble has 100 or a 99.3 grade. Myles Garrett is 81.3 and Trent Williams is a 73. Justen Gamble's better. Okay. There's no context in these numbers, and I think that's the way people read them. And then they just assume like he's better. He sucks. There's not enough explanation into who's doing what and how they're doing it. And so it just becomes a matter of like the number is gospel itself and there's no context behind it. And now it gives people a reason not to watch football and not to actually understand the game. And that's my biggest problem with it. I don't have a problem with the fact that they're doing it. I just think it's created this mush-minded population of people that suck at watching the game and don't even have a passion for watching it anymore. And that's my rant right there.
So from what I'm hearing from that, it's that it doesn't accurately judge the level of competition. It doesn't price that into the grade that it gives. And I don't know if there is an issue of sample size there too, but like, is that kind of what you're getting at? Just it lacks the context of, hey, these are two juggernauts battling.
The other issue though with it is the fact that we actually don't know. We don't know if it factors in who they're playing against because they don't let anybody see the algorithm.
Yeah, and that's a huge part. And they'll say, well, and I've heard when I was at the Combine, I forget what year that was, the founder of PFF was there, and a bunch of guys for PFF was there. They put on this little, kind of like a little soiree at this restaurant bar, and they hosted this big thing. And it was just a good weekend because there was a ton of PFF guys there, a lot of people talking about it. And my old boss, Rick Saratella, and the owner of PFF, were talking one night, and he was telling us, like, it's just a matter of we're grading how well they did their assignment. And to me, when I just heard that, that's me saying, okay, well, some assignments are very, very tough. Some are not. And I don't think PFF is really falsely misadvertising themselves a lot. I just think they put out these grades and then they just accept, like, people are stupid and they're going to take these grades, like I said, take these numbers as gospel. And now we don't have to, we don't have to do any more work. We don't even have to give context. We don't have to tell them how we grade, what we do. It's just let them fight. And it's kind of, like I said, it's just created this really dumb football population of people that don't really understand that it's a game that there's so many variables in football as, to begin with. And now when you're taking out context and just putting a number grade, that's dangerous. And, like we could say, well, Mahomes had a tougher game against the Ravens defense, and he had a lower grade than Bryce Young did, or someone did against the Carolina defense. Well, yeah, it's a tougher assignment. So, of course, his grade might be different, but let's not act like one player is better than the other just because of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Do you think that over the course of a season, those grades kind of average out at all? Like, because that's my thing that I run into is, like, I just got PFF Plus because I was using it for kind of filtering through guys to do for this upcoming draft class and just kind of making sure if I turn on a cut up, the guy has more than 10 snaps. And one of the things I noticed is, like, you pull it up and you sort by grades, right? Highest to lowest. Yep. And you'll have guys on there that have like 20 snaps. And you're like, well, that doesn't really tell me anything because he might have had one big breakout run and then, didn't really do anything. And it's like, oh, we got a huge grade. Well, so like, let's say your gripe is, okay, well, Myles Garrett against Trent Williams. Well, that he might have had a bad game based on the way they grade it. But if you take that and say, here's all the guys he played over the season, we take those grades all together, and that gives us his overall grade. Do you think that increased sample size makes the number more relevant?
I would say it probably makes it even out more. But I've always been someone that's like, I'm not going to go against anything I see. Like, I'm not going to just say something that I don't believe. And, it gets me into trouble sometimes for sure. But I'm never going to say, like, okay, I'll just trust that. Like, I'm going to watch it myself too. I promise you. I'm watching it. I'm not going to let anyone tell me, like, this is the way it was. Don't even bother. Like, no, I'll see it and I'll check it out myself. So I think that's part of it is why I don't just think – I can't necessarily say, it evens out. Like, I need to see it for myself. But I also have a question for you, Jarvis. Do you ever think that this entity that's PFF, do you think that part of their appeal is that they pander to the audiences? Because let's just say, like, it's like the big analysts, Daniel Jeremiah, Bucky Brooks, Dane Brugler, nothing against any of these guys. They're all fantastic at their jobs. But if they go too hard against consensus, they're going to upset people and lose credibility. Even if they're right, they're going to lose credibility because they're losing people that like them and want to just hear what they want to hear. And sometimes I feel like PFF might be doing that. They're just going to give the people what they want to hear because they don't have to show their algorithm or their work behind the results. So now they're just going to pander. And if 90% of people want to hear TJ Watt is the best edge rusher, why the fuck would they not just say, yes, you're right? And now PFF is gospel and more people are going to subscribe because they're giving you what you want to hear. Why go against the echo chamber? You know what I mean? Like, why stick your nose in
it's
the
not even just that. It's not even just that. aspect either. The fact that, like Watt went into the whole issue of the way that they kind of conduct themselves, the fact their grades aren't accurate because compared to a coach's grade and then their grades, pulling them up side by side, they're way off. But it's also just the fact that, you had those contract disputes in the mid 2000s, like the early 2010s, where offensive linemen were trying to figure out ways to get bonuses. And they were like, the agents were like, well, hey, we can use PFF grades, right? We'll use PFF grades to, if we hit this grade on this, we'll get a $500,000 bonus or whatever that deal was. And then you had the issue where, well, then the agent went to PFF and said, hey, my client needs an 85 plus overall in the season grade. And they fix it so that the grade comes out to that, and so there was that whole dispute, behind the scenes where a lot of teams were at least believed that some of these grades were being altered so that, they would hit those bonuses.
Well, it's like
which
2 years ago,
JJ insinuated but didn't go into detail about.
right? And when they represented Aiden Hutchinson, what was it, 2-3 years ago before the draft? Every single thing was like, he's our highest graded prospect we've ever seen, 99 points. Like, it was just like, I don't know how I trust them or how I trust that they know what they're seeing, because there's ulterior motives now behind it. And that's another part of it. And I don't know. I think like there's so many layers to it now. It's really tough to try and weed through, especially for a simple-minded man like me. Like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with these guys anymore.
Why do you trust me and not them?
I hate Jarvis today, man. I hate that he suckered me onto this episode without telling me all this stuff. Why do I trust you? Well, I think there's like a definite personal aspect to this. Like, we've met and spoken about football in length and discussed our own philosophies and the way we view the game. And you're not just, watching a player and then you flash a number to me and I'm like, that's his number on that player. Like, okay. You know what I mean? It's different than that. We get into like in-depth conversations about football and player evaluations and how we do things. So I'd say that's why, but I don't know what answer you want from me.
No, that's a fine answer. Do you think that if PFF had more transparency on who's grading the players and what their process was, and just kind of they went in more, I don't want to say that they don't have some detail and some transparency, because like I actually listened to a podcast about how they do grading, and I've read through their how they grade and all that. There is some with grading players. There's always gray area, right? But I'm just trying to figure out if it's more of you just don't trust the fact that they're this big kind of corporate entity that you can't tell, like, oh, was this guy that watched it, was he someone who's getting paid $5 an hour in Bangladesh to grade this tape, or is it a guy that I know and trust from the football community? So that's kind of where I'm wondering with it.
I mean, I don't think they're useless. Like, I don't have a problem with what they do. I don't think it's useless information. I think a lot of the guys that work for them are great. Like I like Austin Gale, Mike Renner. Who else? There's so many that I actually like.
Mike doesn't work there anymore, but yeah.
Oh, Mike. Oh, you're right. Sam Monson. Is he's still there?
Yeah, he's still there.
PFF guys are all over the place. But there's a lot of guys that do really good work, and you can tell like they understand football and their philosophies are on point. But I just don't think it's gospel. And I think I maybe more have an issue with the way that their numbers and grades are interpreted than the fact that they're doing it as a whole. And sometimes I will say, when you see them break down video, I'm like, you're wrong. That's not, or like, they'll say, well, this linebacker missed this tackle. And I'm like, he took on a puller with the right shoulder, spilled it to his buddy. His buddy didn't make the tackle, and now you're dropping that linebacker. You don't know what you're talking about. And that could be anybody. Like, that's not even just a PFF thing. That's anybody. Mm-hmm. So that's football evaluation. That's just how it goes. But then when they're like, well, this is the grade, and then everyone's screaming in your face, well, look at the grade that this guy got. He's clearly better. I'm like, okay, well, we got to, dig back a little bit and see like where this went wrong. So I'm never going to say like, oh, PFF is just completely stupid, but I'm like, you have to understand sometimes, like, throw that grade away and watch it yourself and then come back to me. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's not that I just hate that they exist. I just think, like I said, it's my problem is it's just creating people that don't care to watch the game anymore. And that's a big problem.
And your problem being more so that you have these grades and these people that think that this is the ultimate truth and not just a part of the evaluation.
Exactly. Yeah. So like if they graded, Samson Ibukum 99 and they graded Myles Garrett 71 and they played the same opponent, 2 weeks in a row, I'm not immediately going to go, well, Samson Ebukam's better than Myles Garrett. I would do my work and say, I'm going to go watch this game and let's see some context. Let's see what happened. Why one had a better game, or did he really? And that's fine. And then I can say, okay. And then if I disagree with PFF, I disagree with PFF. Cool. That's great. Don't have an issue with them necessarily, but I have an issue with people saying, I'm not going to do my own part. I'm not going to do my own part. I'm just going to take that for what it is. And that's end game. You know what I mean?
So you asked me if I think they pander at all. And I think that's an interesting question. I think it's one that's worth asking, because I remember the Aiden Hutchinson era, and it was very much they have that personal connection if they're working with Hutchinson a lot and that sort of thing. I think that's a question that you could probably ask about almost anyone, right? Like when they watch a player, when you ask me, Mark, what do you think about a player? If I go and I watch the tape and put down a grade and then find out that, hey, I put 7th round, everyone thinks he's a first rounder. It's like, oh crap. Or let's say I watch, some guy in the league, and let's say I watch Myles Garrett for a game and I think he has a bad game and everyone's like, he had the greatest game of all time. Then there's a certain pressure pushing against me. I think the thing that would potentially save them there is the way that they do grade. From my understanding, there is an element of, even though there is a human element of someone watching and grading that tape, there's also a strict criteria for, hey, the grade's going to be between a -2 and a +2 on every single play. Here's kind of a rough outline of how a guy goes up or down, and here's the situations. They have, with any algorithm, you have that where you have some degree of stability. You're not going to have wild fluctuations, I guess, with a good algorithm. I think that's something that might save them from that. But I think it's an interesting question to ask, and it's one that you kind of, not only with PFF, but with anyone, have to ask, hey, how much are you influenced by the pressure of, hey, you're watching Myles Garrett tape, how much is that going to sway you, maybe towards giving slightly nicer grades than maybe you should.
Right. And I think it'd be a lot easier to trust PFF, or at least, I don't know about trust them. All right. But let's say I want to see a game and see each play, and I want to see what grade you gave. It'd be different if they released grades for every single player, and each play had a grade assigned to it, because then you can look and be like, okay, I get how they got there. But when at the end of every game they just pop the number, I can understand how they grade, but I don't know how they graded each play that got me there, and that's tough. It would be better if it was kind of like an itemized receipt. Let me see what happened. Let me see what happened here. But we don't. The media or the public never gets that.
Fair.
It makes it hard to trust.
Another thing I would ask is, I think you could kind of poke at Madden ratings with the same critical lens of hey, how do you feel about Madden ratings? How well do those reflect reality?
Right. I've met some Madden, the Madden adjusters one time were at the combine as well, and I'll just say that I don't know if I trust those so much. I don't know if I trust the guy. I don't know if I trust some of the guys I met that are given those grades, because it was an interesting experience, to say the least.
Why don't you trust them?
When I talked to him, I was like, I don't know if they know. They weren't evaluators that day. I met 3 of them, and they were just guys that kind of appeared like fanboys. And I'm trying not to be mean to them. It wasn't like they were bad people, but it was just talking to them. I'm like, they're not evaluators. It was simple as that. They were guys that are just he's fast and good. So he gets a 94 speed. And it was that type of conversation. It wasn't let's talk football philosophies and what do you let, this guy, let's talk about the nuance of how he, covers certain results. It was just a very surface dry conversation of, he's fast, he's good, he's big. That's what we're hearing. Look at his stats, that type of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Most of the time I'm just, he's fast, he's big, he's good. No, I think it's an interesting question, because it's you look at something like a Madden rating, it's the overall rating is what people always focus on. But I don't know if you guys have tinkered with it, where you just bump up the awareness, and a guy goes from an 80 overall to a 90 overall in Madden. Yeah. And it's that's the perfect example of where you could pose that question of, are they grading based on what they want the overall to be, Or are they kind of putting
Right.
each little input? Hey, I watched 20 tackles of this guy just to see his hit power. You know what I'm saying? And
Right.
that's kind of the same thing you run into with any type of grading scale is you have this issue of whatever you're putting in, what does that output create? You know, like when I did a grading scale that was purely, I'm going to put in these numbers and it's going to spit out an overall grade. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
I had a whole bunch of issues where like the algorithm, if you want to call it that, was not good. I would have maybe way too much on throw power or way too much on, let's say, escapability and not enough on accuracy with QBs. With like Lamar, for instance, I had a really hard time with Lamar because when I watched Lamar, like I had a certain criteria of like, hey, this guy's got to be like a traditional pocket passer type. That's the way the scale is built. And so I crushed Lamar because he wasn't built for that scale. So I think that's part of where the question comes to with PFF is like this algorithm that they have, you know, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, where does it kind of come up short? Wanted to throw in another thing here though too, because one of the things John mentioned, I think, was the aspect of like, you know, you had JJ Watt talking about, hey, I've took these grades into these meeting rooms with coaches, put them side by side, they're all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And Jeff Schwartz, former Chiefs lineman, right? That's where he finished his career.
Yeah.
So he tweeted and he said, "No real dog in this fight, but I once challenged a coach about my grade because I thought I played better. He said I did play better than my grade, but that he can't turn in a high grade in a loss. Ridiculous." And so I think that's worth throwing out there because obviously people kind of default to this idea of, oh, well, it's all about what the coaches are grading. That's what matters the most. But at the end of the day, there's still this human element of, you know, one individual person can only capture so much and their grades only mean so much.
Let me ask you another question then, because you bring up the human element. Do you think it's weird to assign a number grade when they are like almost like for instance, I remember Von Miller a while back in his career talking about his, I forget if it was a podcast or an interview, but he was talking about the way he approaches some games. And he was saying like, I'll lose 7 reps in a row on purpose because I'm just trying things. I'm basically a computer and I want to see how the OT reacts to certain things. I want to see what his counters are. I want to see what I can get away with later. Like, so I'm going to bull rush him twice in a row. And on purpose because I want him to short set me. I want him to be ready to take that, and then I counter it later. PFF now is assigning -2 on both those rushes where he probably got stymied right away. But he's like, I'm doing this on purpose. They probably won't win, but I need the offensive tackle to get in this mindset. I need to basically get him ready to lose later. So then later on when he wins reps easily, all he can get is a +2. So now it's like that small window of grading kind of doesn't capture really anything that we just saw from Von Miller that game, right? He lost 2 reps on purpose. He gets 2 -2s. Now he's dominating. He can only get a +2. So the grade can't really fluctuate that much. Everyone reading the grade after the game would say, he played kind of a shitty game. He ended up with a 78. But it's like, no, bro, he lost 5, 6, 7 reps on purpose because now he's whooping that OT's ass and you're giving him only a +2. Why not? He should probably get a +20. Like this was masterful from him. A masterful performance, and now he's done. You know what I mean? So at some point, I think there's just too many human elements that go into football, and too many variables play to play to really say like it can only be a 5-point fluctuation, -2, -1, 0, +1, +2. Maybe that doesn't capture what really is going on here. And I mean, I feel sometimes in hockey, I'm like I'm going to take the puck, and it's a 1-on-2, and I'm like, let me see if I can split these guys. And then I'm just trying to read what the defensemen really do when I do certain things. I'm going to try and go between my legs and see how he reacts to that. Later on, I'm like, all right, I've done these few things. I know this guy's weaknesses. I know what I'm supposed to do now. Now I'm whooping that ass, and I'm not going to get enough credit for it because I kind of lost on purpose just because I need to function. Anderson Silva in the UFC was, arguably one of the greatest fighters of all time. And he said for the first 3-4 minutes of the first round, sometimes the whole first round, I'm just doing stupid shit because I want to see their range. I want to see how they react to my footwork. I want to see how they move. He's like, he said, I'm a computer. I'm just going to process all this information, and then I'm going to let loose. Well, some people could say, well, for 3-4 minutes, you sucked. We're going to grade you badly that first round. When he's like, I did that on purpose. That was my goal. And now, I knocked him out at the beginning of the second round. Would you say I had a horrible first round? No, I did what I was trying to do. And I don't know, I don't know. I'm not sure what answer I'm looking for him. I'm not even sure the question I'm asking yet. But
No, I
does
get what
that
you're
make
asking.
any sense?
Yeah. I guess what I would push back to you with is who's like, let's say you and me watch it. We would grade it negatively, right? He loses those first, few rushes, and then he picks up later on. We'd grade it poor early on, good later on. Would his coach grade it that way? Would his coach go, you struggled here. Here's the reasons why I'm going to grade you poorly?
I don't think so. I think a coach would probably be on the side of awesome way,
Well,
way to set that
that
guy
also
up.
goes back into process, understanding what the player's process is, right? Because coaches are going to be working with these guys. They know what the plan is going into a game. They help them develop the plan, so they understand that aspect of it. Whereas PFF is looking at it, or anybody else that tries to grade that's not involved directly with the player or the team, is looking at it from a overview standpoint. So, that's why that is another reason why I think the grades would be off, right? Because we don't know what their process is. We don't know what they're trying to engage. But if I was to counter your point with anything, it would say, okay, well, let's say he's in the beginning of trying stuff and trying to set up this tackle, and he doesn't set the boundary on his own run outside. Running back runs for a touchdown from 75 yards out. Is that a good rep or a bad rep? See?
How would his coach
It
grade it?
go,
Wait,
Exactly, right? Because then it's like, well, if you hadn't been trying stupid stuff and just set the edge and then tried the stupid stuff, then we don't have a 75-yard touchdown on the board,
right.
So there's a lot of aspects. It goes into what Jarvis talked about, like last month about complex systems. Grading, football in general is a complex system,
Yeah,
and so
I remember
to
that
me, the
conversation.
verdict as I'm listening to this conversation as it goes back and forth is that PFF grades are not perfect. Anybody that treats them as gospel, okay, cool, enjoy it, have fun. But they're just another part of the
Yeah,
evaluation. They can be valuable. There's good information that PFF definitely does collect.
yes,
So I definitely think that's a huge part of it, with snap counts, with where people were lined up, with what the assignment was. And you can sit there and kind of go into, okay, well, the missed tackles, that's debatable, and all that different stuff. That's all debatable stuff. That's true. But at the end of the day, it's just a part of the evaluation.
right.
It's something that you should be using to help you, if you want to, going into a game to study it and look at the tape. That's what it sounds like to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Fine.
think, like I said, Jarvis, I have more of a problem with the way people interpret PFF than what they actually do and why they're in existence. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a matter
And
of
I
like I
and I
hate
think
PFF, but
that was JJ's problem with it too. Because JJ, yeah, he trashed the grades a little bit and said they're really different than what the coaches put out. But it's also a lot of the rant went into the conduct of the people that follow it and the people that use it, and then also some of the people that work there, and the way that they hold themselves up high and mighty and blah blah blah. Like, that was his whole deal, and that's why he went on his rant. I really think was more so that, and then he just took the opportunity to say, "Hey, your grades are nothing like what the coaches are giving out." While he was at it, I think it was more so geared at the people that just interpret these things as gospel and think that that's just
yeah.
evaluating football players.
And I don't know if you saw Jarvis, but I was defending PFF all week. I was one of the ones like, guys, you don't understand how they grade. Like CJ
Yeah.
Stroud threw an easy picked ball into double coverage that somehow was not intercepted. But that was clearly that's a -2 on their score sheet. And everyone's like, well, he played a great game, probably had better stats than Love. And I'm like, but they're grading each play. So that is where, he had a few really negative plays that didn't actually affect the game long term because the defense didn't necessarily capitalize. But if you average out all those plays, his 6 or 7 horrible plays that day made his grade lower, even though he ended up winning the game and had a good game. And, I was one of the ones trying to push that. So if that's not proof enough that I don't hate PFF, I don't hate PFF. It's like I said, that was one of the times where I'm like, again, people are interpreting these numbers as gospel. And now it's going against what they wanted instead of for them, like it usually does. And there has to be that middle ground of like, when the grade is bad and you don't like it, you have to defend it the same way as when the grade is good and you do like it, but people aren't willing to do that. And that kind of made me realize, like, I don't think anyone understands the process behind this whole thing.
Yeah, I think that actually you bring that up, and it's the perfect thing to bring up because I think it kind of ties to what in general I was trying to capture, and that's how well does a single number capture reality, or a single set of numbers capture reality, right? So like a box score. Well, these two quarterbacks had the exact same, stat sheet essentially. They didn't play the same. That box score captures reality less effectively than if people were to watch the games and compare them, than if PFF were to have their own grading system and say, hey, this guy had a mediocre game, this guy had a great game. So I think it goes to how well does any single thing capture reality, right? Like PFF grading versus a coaching grading. The coach is going to see certain things that PFF won't. PFF is going to have a comparative ability to like the rest of the league that coach might not necessarily have. The coach might be relative to their own expectations, right? Same goes for when you and I both watch a player. Each of us has a different lens that we're bringing to it that kind of brings us together closer to a kind of true reality of what the guy did on tape. There is an interesting thing I shared. Now I'm going to make sure you watch it later on, Gam. But I shared a video from Stephen J. Gould talking about essentially intelligence test and trying to get a single number to define intelligence. Well, how do you do that? Is there a true single number? And we have a whole history of trying to do that. There is a guy in soil sciences that showed that soil scientists were trying to find a single number to judge the quality of soil. It's like, oh, this one's a 72.8. This one's a 34. It's like, well, soils don't really have a pure quality number. They do different things. The soils are all different, right? So a player might have a 34 or a player might have a 72. That's not going to capture the reality of what all the various dimensions of what that player brings.
You got to send that to me then.
I will.
Okay.
But I don't know if you have anything else you want to add on. I thought it was we kind of covered most of the stuff that I thought was interesting on it. But
no, I love you and I hate you. You suckered me into that on a Saturday morning.
I thought we were going to discuss the Emory Hunt, Felix Anudike-Uzomah thing, so we'll have to save that for another time. I kind of got surprised by PFF, so I had to catch up on short notice with it.
No, I'm glad you brought. I mean, you activated my brain this fine Saturday, and I'm happy for that. And no,
he's
dude,
gonna go do great things now, boys.
Yeah, I'm really happy we brought Jarvis because he makes me think about things I would normally never probably think about because I'm silly and stupid. But
I feel like I've strained your brain harder than everything since our first episode when we got on here.
Yeah, it's been a wake up call though. I got to get smarter. However I can manage that.
He's going back to school, boys.
Yeah, I'm going to take college courses again.
That's going to do it here for the Sick Podcast. And so that's the verdict. PFF, it's just another tool. Don't put everything into it, but don't shit on it completely either. I think that's what we've come up with.
It's there.
So for the guys, we'll be back at it here shortly. This has been the Sick Podcast. AC, let's get out of here.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast with Draft Vogel on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.